We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a business, Mr. Beale.
Go on without me. Just go.
A good soldier never leaves a man behind.
Because I wouldn't give you 2 cents for all your fancy rules if behind them they didn't have a little bit of plain, ordinary, everyday kindness.
Life, finds a way.
Welcome to Silver Screen Biases, where we dig into a critically acclaimed movie and evaluate the truth claims within it. I'm Nelson.
This is Jeff.
This is Lucas.
And this week we'll be covering
It's a Wonderful Life.
But first, I would like to talk to you guys about the Tuttle Twins. Tuttle Twins is a TV show, book series, magazine series, podcast series. Basically, it's there to help your kids be critical thinkers. It covers things from inflation to how laws get made. Lucas, are you familiar with them?
Yes.
Have you? Do your kids read them?
No.
No?
I've not introduced it to them yet.
Okay.
No.
Okay, there's, I think, 13 of the main series books out so far.
Sounds about right, yeah.
And my middle child, he's 5. His favorite is the one that's probably most appropriate to today's episode. His favorite is The Creature from Jekyll Island, which he calls the inflation monster. And actually, that's why we have Lucas on today. Isn't that right, Jeff?
That is right. We're talking about the inflation monster.
We're talking about the inflation monster. No, we're talking about It's a Wonderful Life, and a major plot point in that is
Monsters.
Fractional reserve banking. That's
Right.
right.
Monsters, yes.
Monsters. And Lucas actually here is, at least within this room, he's definitely the expert. I don't know if he'd consider himself an expert in the field, but I think he should. He is give your own credentials, Lucas.
Oh, sure. I'm an economics professor at Kent State University's Stark campus.
Mm-hmm.
I teach economics there, including one of the classes I've taught before, though not recently, is money, credit, and banking.
Okay.
So I might know a little bit about banking.
Yeah, you know a thing or two about
At least enough to convince other people that they should pay me to
Nice.
talk about it.
Yeah. And that's something that I was really excited to have you here for. I know, as I was saying before recording, I know enough to be dangerous when it comes to this kind of stuff. Enough to be passionate about it, and not always enough to articulate clearly why I'm passionate about it. So I'm glad to have you here. To start off, what are some of your biases? That's something that we engage with a lot in this show. I come from a subset of libertarians called anarcho-capitalists. I think the free market is sufficient for all governance. Jeff is a little bit more apolitical than me, but he believes that the government provides essential services that are worth having. Where do you kind of fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, I guess I would call myself a moderate anarcho-capitalist.
Okay.
Perhaps a wishy-washy anarcho-capitalist.
All right. How do you feel about the term minarchist?
No, I don't think that's quite accurate, right? Because
Okay.
I wouldn't advocate for government having particular functions.
Okay.
Just I don't advocate very strongly against it.
Okay. You don't get...
I guess it might be that I don't think the government is as bad as some of the more extreme people I generally agree with. think it is.
That's fair.
So,
That's
it
fair.
shouldn't be there, but,
Right.
we can get by.
Sure.
So maybe I'm more optimistic than some of those that share my feelings.
Of course, yeah. The anarcho-capitalist crowd can get pretty excited.
Right, yeah. I guess you might also call me a soft core anarcho-capitalist.
All right. And then what I think really makes up the two halves of worldview is kind of your political opinions and your religious convictions. Jeff and I both grew up Christian and are still Christian and are raising our families that way. How do you kind of fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, very similar. I grew up Christian household, definitely have adopted that as my own view.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, I'm in kind of the realm of what we'd call the evangelical Friends. It's
Okay.
a branch of the Quakers.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And not too far from the Methodists, I suppose.
Yeah, I
Just
think
different history.
Share a lot of doctrinal beliefs.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I know
You're
Quakers are.
Sorry, I just got ahead of myself. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Wait till I'm wrong
Okay.
before you tell me that I'm wrong.
That checks out.
I know the Quakers are. Is Evangelical Friends? Are you a pacifist doctrinarily?
That's a funny question.
Okay.
Historically, yes. Practically today, not really.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that is a
Methodists
view,
are kind of the same way.
right. That's a view that kind of shifted right around World War II.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So you go before that, we were much more consistently pacifist. World War II and after, much less consistently pacifist.
It's interesting during war fervor how those beliefs change.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. Definitely.
This movie deals with war fervor a bit too, doesn't it? Both
Both
wars. I guess both wars would have been
Yeah.
in this timeline, but only one of them gets discussed. World War II. Let's jump into some production stuff. What do you got for us, Jeff?
production. This movie was filmed in 1945, 46. It was set to release in 47, but they ended up pushing it ahead of time for just, I think, financial reasons and stuff. It ended up not doing well in the box office. So before I get to those numbers, I will say, just because I don't want to forget these stats, it is 8.6 out of 10 on the IMDb scale.
Okay.
It's actually the number 21. It's the highest rated movie so far on IMDb that we've reviewed.
It's also the highest rated
Christmas
movie.
Correct. And it's the oldest movie to date that we've watched on this podcast.
Yes.
So this is 1946, James Stewart, Donna Reed. And this is as of December 6th that these stats are coming from.
Okay.
So if you're listening in the future, that says
maybe
these
different
dates. The Rotten Tomato scores are 93 Tomato Meter and 95 audience.
Okay.
And I've got a number for you, Nelson, and I know you've done the math already, but the budget for this movie was $3.18 million.
Yeah.
What does that amount to today, 2022?
That would be $50 million.
Okay. Are you keeping a track of like previous movie budgets?
No, I should go back and keep track. But I'm pretty sure
Where
this
does
is
this
one of the
fall?
most expensive movies.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I do know that the set for Bedford Hills or Bedford Falls was one of the biggest sets to date in 1946 that had ever been created. It took 2 months to create the set for Bedford Falls.
Yeah.
And it was based off of
Syracuse, New York.
Syracuse, New York. Yep, correct. A small town. Yeah. Well, it's not small now, but
Right. Was at the time.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. This all takes place. They never say it explicitly, but it all takes place in upstate New York.
Mm-hmm. It made $44,000 opening weekend, U.S. and Canada. I don't know what the inflation is on that, but it didn't do well initially.
Yeah, it was a commercial failure.
Yeah. In the initial box run office, it only earned $3.3 million over its whole run. It didn't
only
even break,
barely went over 3.3.
Well, yeah, 3.8. So it
just
right,
barely
it
went over what it cost.
Yep. Yeah, I'm glad we're not talking to a math person today. Oh wait.
Yeah, if you don't make back your production cost opening weekend, typically you're considered a commercial failure in movies.
Yes. So that's all the initial stuff that I have right now. And I'll have more facts to spit throughout the episode. Cool. So.
All right.
Yes.
Did you did Rotten Tomatoes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did all those stats. Yeah.
I should pay attention more when you speak.
Yeah, you should listen to the episode.
Yeah. I'll hear you again when I edit this later.
And I guess this is a fun fact too, just because we're starting about the beginning of the movie. The film takes place. It spans the time from 1919 to 1945.
Okay.
Those are the years that they span in this movie because we start out, with young George Bailey.
I should know off the top of my head when World War I is, but I don't.
So this movie spans from 1919 to 1945, specifically December 24th, 1945.
Right.
Christmas Eve.
Yeah, it's really interesting because World War II is in the movie, and he talks about him crying and praying on VE Day and VJ Day, Victory in Europe, Victory in Japan.
Yes.
And both of those were less than a year before the movie came out. All right, 1914 to 1918 was World War I. So this movie takes place immediately after World War I. I should learn some history or something. I'd probably be smarter if I did. Probably articulate my points a little better if I knew what happened.
Hey, we're getting better each movie with our facts. We'll know a little bit more as we progress in this podcast.
Yeah. All right. So let's start with some minor observations. Jeff, what do you got for me?
All right. So initially, we're just talking about reactions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
let's start with that.
This is not the first time I've watched this movie. This is to my knowledge, the second time I've watched this as an adult. I don't remember watching it as a kid. So this is the first time that I've intentionally watched this. Second time I've intentionally watched this movie. The first time I hated it.
Yeah.
Hated it. I was talking with my wife because I was trying to pinpoint when we watched this because it wasn't last Christmas, but it wasn't that long ago. So it's been within the last 5 years, I'd say. I watched the movie for the first time. I hated it. I couldn't, and I was not excited about rewatching it. I watched it. Actually, I finished it today. Started it last night. Finished it today.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
The dialogue is terrific.
Yeah, like I don't know. Like I've definitely grown a lot, and like throughout this podcast, you'll probably learn some stuff that's gone on in my life personally as we talk about different topics as we decide break down movies and stuff. But like, I was definitely in a darker place when I watched this because my wife and I we've dealt with infertility for multiple years, and then years after that, then it took us multiple years to finally adopt. So like within the last time watching this, I was probably in a lot more pessimistic worldview at the time, and so I was probably not happy that everything worked out for George in the end. And I was probably more nitpicky about the way like he's just an aggressive guy. The way he shakes people and like and kisses people and like ear kisses and stuff, like it was just weird. But when I watched it the second time, like those things didn't bother me this round, and I was actually invested in the story. Like I just like there was more emotion. I found myself more emotionally attached this time around because maybe I'm more in a better place mentally watching this time. But yeah, I liked it. Like I legitimately liked it this time. Like so huge transformation for me just in entertainment values.
Right.
But and I was more emotionally like I felt good after watching it. So yeah. That's my initial response. Like I was very happy rewatching this movie and I wasn't expecting to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Lucas?
Yeah, it's remarkably similar actually, because I think this might be like the third time that I've seen it as an adult. Right. So I remember when I watched it again a year, maybe 2 or 3 ago with my wife, because she loves this movie.
Okay.
I think in part because she likes Jimmy Stewart because he's from near where she grew up.
Right.
Okay.
So
Iowa, I believe, right?
Pennsylvania.
Oh, I was way off.
Yeah, the other.
Donna Reed.
Right.
That might Donna Reed. Donna Reed's from Iowa.
Right.
Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, but it's Indiana, Pennsylvania. Because Pennsylvania likes to name its cities after other states, apparently.
That makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So he's from around there. She's from not too far from there. So I think it's that Pennsylvania pride or something like that. Right. But I remember watching it and not particularly liking it. Right. And then, watched it again a couple days ago to prepare for this podcast. Mm-hmm. And like normally with old movies, I don't like them because the pacing is all wrong.
Right.
Yeah. But it kept my interest the whole time.
Yeah.
Right. And like there are parts that I still find annoying, but they're much less than what I remembered. I think they just stood out more the previous time I watched it. Yeah, it might have been I just wasn't in the right place mentally or something like that. But I think we're all just happier this year or something.
I absolutely would agree with that. I do think this is, I mean, at least from my perception, it seems like to be a more optimistic year, just in general. Maybe not for everyone, but in the people in my circle, it's been a good year.
Mm-hmm. A good year, I think. Especially in light of the last few years, this has been a pretty good year.
Right, yeah.
I saw this as a kid, and it didn't hold my attention, probably just because it wasn't enough bright colors. Mm-hmm. And I think I didn't see it for I know I didn't see it for several years, but I think it was like 10, 15 years. And I saw it a year or 2 ago. We were trying to watch a bunch of Christmas movies with the kids to try and start that tradition. It didn't quite stick.
Right.
We didn't watch it last year. I think we watched 2 years ago. And I remember enjoying it, but I also wasn't in a good place at the time. And so watching it this time, I really enjoyed it. I think that the dialogue is really sharp and clever. Mm-hmm. I agree with you that usually pacing... Lucas, the pacings in older movies is pretty brutal because they just take theater and just film it, and it just doesn't work the same. Yep. But the pacing on this is really good, and maybe that's part of why it didn't do so well when it originally came out. It's because for its time, the pacing is actually a lot faster.
Right.
I know that my dad saw Star Wars in theater, and he said that it was like breakneck pacing. Mm-hmm. And I watched it today, and I'm like, man, that's slow.
It takes a while.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I think that could have played into why it didn't do so well at the time. But I think it's an incredible movie. The main message of the movie, I think it's staring you right in the face. You can't miss it, right? Like if you don't get the main point of this movie, you didn't watch the movie. Mm. But I think that there's also a handful of smaller things that show up in the movie that I think are really interesting as well. And I'm excited to talk about those. What are some of the biases that show up in the dialogue that stuck out to you, Jeff?
As far as bias goes, I think I found myself enjoying this movie a little too much, and especially finishing it this morning, I think that I don't have too many, so I'm not bringing too many to the table today. But I think one of the first ones for me was it wasn't necessarily a bias as much as it was an observation. Okay. But I noticed there was still some racial divide in parts of these movies with some dialogue. The Bailey family had a servant.
Right.
A
live-in nanny.
And,
Annie, yeah.
Yeah, and she would make not sarcastic remarks, but she would say things acknowledging that she's in a different environment than the people she works for or serves. And that caught me off guard. And maybe just because I'm more sensitive to it today. Sure. But just seeing that in a movie, and it just happens to be common stance. Like it's like the movie isn't focused on racism or slavery. It's not that she was a slave, but this racial divide.
Right.
Like, but that moment where she came in, I was like, oh, okay.
She's not the only black character. She is the only speaking black character.
Correct.
Right.
But she talks about like at the end, when she gives money to George Bailey, she's like, I was saving this for my divorce.
If
I
find a husband.
Right. So like, I don't know. And so like again, I was just watching for all of her lines and stuff, and I was just more aware of her lines and stuff. Like I wasn't sure if that was implying like if they were establishing like a sort of a stereotype for that. So it's more of a question than it is an observation. Like than it is like a statement. But like, do you think there's something within that? Like the way her dialogue was like, I was saving this for my first divorce. Like, were they establishing just kind of where black women and men, for that matter, are in the 1940s?
I think
is there weight to that?
I don't know because I didn't think to look into those demographic questions. I typically do. My takeaway from that scene was they're just showing that she's catty.
Okay.
Right. And I think that they'd established that pretty well throughout the movie.
Right.
She's not the only black woman that donates to the Baileys either. There's another lady, that sounds terrible. Another lady, like half a second beforehand, she doesn't speak, but she's dressed really well. And watching it, I was wondering to myself, because it's hard for us to put ourselves in the shoes of somebody in 1948. I don't know what that world is like. But I think it was very progressive for its time. Having a very charismatic, very likable, very clever black woman in a speaking role, portraying multiple black women with means of their own. I think that it was progressive for its time. But kind of like similar to Gone with the Wind, we look back at it now and we're like, why'd you put that in a movie?
Right. So, we will go over that movie probably at some point.
Yeah.
That movie's in the top 250.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was one of the first things that stuck out to me was just, I wasn't, being that it's a Christmas movie, quote unquote Christmas movie, and it's a movie about not coming of age, but just a kind of a midlife crisis for this guy, and in an essential legal crisis too. Like I wasn't expecting for just for that to catch my eye. So just that was something that I came across.
Now, I watched it through once, and I'm usually hawkish about pausing and pulling up the scripts and all that. What was the specific crime that he would have been charged with?
So, oh man, I wish I had that script up. It was like failure to pay. No, you're talking about George Bailey at the end.
Yeah. What? Was it embezzling or what was?
I think it's like a misuse of funds or something.
That $8,000. Yeah, that $8,000 was all of his bank.
Yeah.
Customers' money.
Right.
And so like the fact that it disappeared means that those customers don't have their money now.
Right.
So he didn't steal it, but he was negligent with it, or someone was negligent with it of staff.
Right.
And so because it's missing, he's accountable to, or him as his uncle.
Yeah.
Him or his uncle, because his uncle said, you or I are going to jail.
Yeah.
No, actually, Mr. Potter said that.
Right.
One of you's going to jail. So I think it's just the fact that like someone else's money went missing and he was responsible. Okay. So yeah, malfeasance. Potter mentioned a couple other words or phrases or legalities, but malfeasance is, which is fun to say.
Yeah.
Right.
That $8,000 works out to $125,000 a day. So that kind of helps contextualize.
Yeah. Well, especially in that one scene where they're like, okay, I need $17 for the next 2 weeks. And you're just like,
yeah.
Wow.
The person right before her says, I've got $242 in here and 242 isn't going to break anybody. I was like, okay, well, like it wouldn't break me right now. I wouldn't like, I'm not even lower middle class, but 242 is something that if
you've got class, Nelson.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah. But that works out to 3,700 and that would break me.
Yeah.
That would break me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then their honeymoon money that they end up spending in that scene
Right.
was $2,000, which is $30,500. That is a honeymoon fund, I tell you what.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that
Did
explains
she come-
their plans.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to see the world
Yeah.
with these $2,000.
And Mary came from money, right? Like-
The house that her mom lives in looks nice, but
Well,
they don't really say, do they?
She bought the house, that manor, like, because that wasn't George's doing.
Oh, that's
so like,
right.
so she had to have means. She went to college, like,
Right.
it's like I feel like she had money, and I think post marriage, it was like as if she didn't have access to that anymore. Not that she should just tap into her parents' money, but just it seems like up until marriage, she's like she was a woman of wealth. She bought the house, that's where their honeymoon ended up being.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they're both poor. Like,
I wonder if that was in the original script and just got cut.
yeah. But there seemed to be a disconnect between the money she came from versus the money she had post marriage.
Possibly.
Right.
But I did notice, I was like, man, that girl just bought a house
Yeah.
without her husband knowing. like, dang. Like, I mean, obviously it's a fictional story, but like, it's meant to be realistic up until the angel comes
Sure.
in. Like, it's meant to be a believable scenario.
Right.
And that would have just, I don't know if I would have been happy if I would have found out that much money would have been dropped on a house without my knowing in my new marriage.
Yeah.
You spent how
Right.
much? And it used to be a hotel. Like they could
Was
have
it?
turned, yeah, it was a manor. Like, it's like, or like essentially like a bed and breakfast or would be now today the Airbnb type of stuff. So that big mansion was used to be used as a hotel.
Oh, okay.
So like,
I hadn't caught that.
and they had refurbished it. Like, they could have made money off of that if they needed to.
Sure, as a boarding house.
Yeah, there was
Right.
some errors where I'd be like, as me in my mind, I'd be like, okay, you can make money off of that. Okay, you can make money off of that. Okay, I mean, come on, you're like,
Yeah.
all right, and if you don't have money, but you fixed this whole, like, we saw what the building looked like before,
Right.
and now it's fixed and livable,
Well, that's also over the course of like 7 years.
right? So maybe that's where all the money from her family went. Maybe they funded that. And
Yeah.
then, so yeah, but there was some financial things that I don't know if they were just loopholes or story holes, but
Plot armor.
plot armor, yeah. Yeah. But
What about you, Lucas? What are some things that stuck out to you in the dialogue?
was there anything specifically as a person of math means? Was there any?
Math magician.
Yeah, was there anything like just? Do you see a movie? Okay, so even if it's like 21 or any movie that has to do with banking, do you see that differently as someone who understands that whole different world that I can't even fathom? Like, does entertainment in that category feel watched differently for you? Or viewed differently?
I suspect so.
Okay.
I actually will often, kind of jokingly, but half jokingly, tell my students that every movie I watch is a documentary about economics. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Right? So I often
Scarcity in
talk.
every movie.
Right, yeah, I'll talk about, this is one of my favorite documentaries about economics. Right? It's a Wonderful Life. What stands out to me is naturally the banking scenes,
Right.
which I certainly would show to my classes about bank runs and these kinds of things, and what does it tell us about how the banking system works. I don't know if now is when we want to get into this or not.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Absolutely.
Okay. One of the big reasons that I showed this scene was that George Bailey does a good job explaining what a fractional reserve banking system is. Like, you're thinking of this place all wrong. Like, we have the money back in the safe, but we don't. It's in so-and-so's house and so-and-so's house and all of that, right? Which is very accurate. Right? And it also shows kind of one of the ways around when we run into this issue of the bank run. So what do you do when people actually want their money and you don't have enough for everybody?
Right.
And in this case, we see, Mary rushes in and, here's $2,000. We can use that.
Yeah.
But the way that
Deus ex machina.
Right. But the way that I would interpret that is that we have this capital injection from a new investor. Right. So an investor comes in and says, I want to put more money into this as an investment.
Right. Which is also what Mr.
$2,000
Potter was offering to do.
Right. Exactly.
50 cents on the dollar.
Right. Like, he was willing to buy up people's, effectively their shares in this bank, since that was the way their loan structure worked.
Right.
Or their deposit structure worked, rather. Right. So, yeah. And it's These investors come in and can provide the funds. Now, it also did rely, we saw very heavily on George Bailey being very charismatic.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, with $2 left.
Right.
So,
which they put into the safe to mate like bunnies.
That's right. That's right. And hope for the best there.
Yeah. So for those of us unfamiliar with the term, what is fractional reserve banking?
Yeah, so fractional reserve banking, it's the system we have in the modern world, where when you put money into the bank, part of that goes into the reserve, and then the rest gets lent out. Right. So the reserve would be what is it the bank actually holds on hand to deal with people that have withdrawals. So an alternative system, though, would be a 100% reserve bank.
Okay.
Where every dollar I take to the bank, they keep in the vault.
Right.
And then when I come and I want the money out, there is no crisis.
Right.
Even if everybody gets in line, it's just a matter of how long you have to wait in line to get your money back out.
Of course.
But it is actually all in the vault.
Right. And right now, I think the legal lower limit for reserves in checking accounts is 0 and savings account is 10%.
0.
It's also 0?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. For it has been 0 for savings accounts for quite a while.
Okay.
They recently changed it on checking accounts down to 0.
Okay. So if all of us decide today that we don't believe that our money's actually in the bank because it's not,
right,
and we all want it today in cash, what's the FDIC minimum? It's like 2,500.
Let's see. It's a maximum.
Maximum, sorry.
Right. So I think it's $250,000 is the most that they'll cover.
Okay.
So as long as you have less than $250,000 in the account,
right,
you're covered.
I'm good.
Covered for
So
all
I'm
of it.
good.
Yeah.
I'm not even close.
Not
to
a problem that I currently have.
Right.
And so a bank run is when.
By the way, you can support this podcast. Just kidding.
So a bank run then is when the people that have money in the bank are scared that the money's not there, and they all go.
They're scared that their money's in danger.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
The key is that people are trying to take their money out.
Okay.
All at once at a pace that the bank can't handle.
Right.
And really, I think that George describes this really well, in that we're waiting for other people to pay off their loans.
Right.
As people make the loan payments, then we have the money available for you.
And he also clarified with the first guy who wanted his money that it's in their contract as their customers
60 days.
up to 60 days.
Right.
And that was something that I didn't remember being in the movie.
Right.
Now, do you think that was just to fully close out your account, or was that for any withdrawal?
Right.
Like 60 days for any withdrawal, or 60 days to fully close out?
could
Because
have-
that's what he was doing.
It could have been
was
fully
closing out.
close out. It might also have just been in the contract up to 60 days for any withdrawal.
Right.
And that's just to prevent bank runs.
Yeah. And here I'm thinking about that, and I'm wondering how much of this might be because it was a building and loan rather than a bank. So they're treated differently legally. So the savings and loan system is different.
It's still effectively a bank,
right?
But it operates a little bit differently.
Exactly. So, and that's why, when he says about selling his shares effectively is what he's doing, that's not the kind of normal language we use when we talk about taking out a withdrawal from a bank. But it would make sense if they treat deposits not as a deposit, but as you're buying shares in the bank. So then you're having to sell, or rather the building and loan.
Right.
And so that I think that legally there might be something different there than there would have been across the street at the bank.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and review some of the law here, but I think that credit unions kind of have a similar structure.
Okay.
Where in part of the deposit you put into a credit union nowadays is actually buying shares
in the
credit union.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think typically it's like the first $5 or something like that. Right?
Okay.
Yep.
And so hypothetically, in a full reserve bank, the physical building would have to be quite large, and then that's one of the bigger reasons. That's one of many reasons that fractional reserve happens. I've heard some people give fractional reserve banking more sinister origins. What can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, that's I guess the story you often hear is that goldsmiths were the ones that were effectively bankers early on. Since early on gold was what was used as money, goldsmiths naturally have a lot of gold.
Right.
So they say, I don't want to carry my gold around because somebody's going to hear it jangling in my pocket and rob me.
Okay.
And so I'll let the goldsmith keep it. He gives me a paper receipt saying how much of my gold he's holding.
And that's what bills started as.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so it's effectively like a checking account sort of deal, but bills would be the claim to the gold, and then I could potentially hand this bill off to somebody else, and then they have the claim to my gold. Right. So we can treat these bills as money. Okay. Even though the gold is really what is being exchanged. Then those that want to put a nefarious spin on this say, well, then the goldsmith realized they had all this gold just sitting in the back room, right? And they could potentially make some more income by lending the gold out, right, as a loan. And so then they decided to invent this fractional reserve system. I don't know how much history there is actually in this being the true origins. Sure, to be honest, I just don't know, right, whether this is the origin or not. Okay, yeah, but that's the way the story is often told. Right. That's the story I've heard, and. I mean, the incentives certainly are there. Oh, absolutely. It makes perfect sense. Right. I have a bunch of gold sitting here. I can't make jewelry out of it because somebody else owns it. But if I lend it out for a little while, nobody cares which coin or which bar they get. Right. As long as they get their same ounces of gold back. Exactly. When they want it. Right. So I mentioned early on the Tuttle Twins book, Creature from Jekyll Island, is kind of about what causes inflation. Mm-hmm. Fractional reserve banking is something that causes inflation in some ways. Mm-hmm. It's not definitely. And how is it that fractional reserve banking causes inflation? Well, one of the results of this is that we have an increase in the money supply. And so I put the money into the bank. They only hold on to, say, 10% of it is kind of the conventional number. Used to be the legal number, but now conventional. When they lend out the other 90%, now we have more money out there. Okay. Because we have that, let's say if I put $100 in, I still think I've claimed my $100, so I could write a check with it. On the other hand, somebody else now has a $90 loan they just took out. Okay. So what was $100 at first has now turned into $190. Right. And then it can get even more than that. If the person spends that $90 loan on something else, that person goes and deposits it into the bank. The bank keeps $9, lends out $81 again. Right. So now we have what was originally $100 turning into, what does that come to? Like $271. Right. Through just a couple rounds of this lending process. Okay. If you do the math of it, it turns out that a $100 deposit can run into $1,000. Pretty quickly. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Like with a few rounds of lending, as long as they're keeping 10% on hand. Right. And then you've got more money chasing the same amount of products, and that drives up the cost of products. Right. Yeah, there's nothing about a loan that makes us immediately have more stuff that we can buy. Right. Yeah. Right. Okay. I knew that was the means by which fractional reserve banking leads to inflation. I also knew that I wouldn't be able to competently articulate it. Well, I don't know whether I did either. I certainly understand it. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'm taking all my money out of the bank tonight.
Yeah, that's the wrong lesson learned.
Oh,
right. I don't actually recommend
repeat it all again.
What is money?
I appreciate this. Has been fascinating. As one who, I'm just bank ignorant, just in general. I'm not sure. So I kind of tend to be more. If any of our listeners are New Girl, or like watch New Girl, I'm more like Nick Miller. Like I'd rather have my money in a box than at a bank. Like just because of access, but that's just. But like I do have a bank account. So, but when it comes to knowing how the banks function, I would say I'm pretty ignorant about it and stuff. And I just assume that.
I don't think that's anything to be embarrassed of either.
Well, I'm not embarrassed.
Oh, good. Because it's very common. I remember when I first moved to the States, I was frustrated with how little Americans understood about Canada. Like they asked me the most ridiculous questions, like, "Do you guys actually live in igloos?" I'm like, no, of course not. And I mentioned this to my dad. Frustrated.
Been asked that?
And I've been asked.
Oh my God.
I've been asked more ignorant than that. Somebody asked me, "Do you have cars in Canada?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, of course." And I was frustrated with that level of ignorance. And then my dad said to me, "Okay, who's the president of Greenland?" And I was like, "I don't know." He's like, "They're our closest neighbor." And I was like, and he's like, "I don't even know if they have a president." And I was like, "Okay, I get your point." So most people are completely ignorant of how banks work. And I think that that's thoroughly justified because unless you're in finance of some sort, it's almost never going to come up. I think it's worth knowing. I think it's worth understanding. Because I think it informs a lot of policy decision, it informs how you vote, understanding these little things. But and like from a practical perspective, what the bank does with my money when I put it in there, I have very little reason to care. Right.
honestly, as long as when I write a check, it clears.
Right.
Right. Or as long as when I go to the ATM, I can actually get my money out.
Right.
And the grand majority of the time, the system works perfectly well. And so there's no reason that any of us should worry about this.
Of course. It's the when it doesn't.
Right.
Which
it's
is
when things get interesting.
Yeah, is the bank runs.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So I articulated poorly what a bank run is. Jeff kind of tagged on that. Can you give your economics professor, like, this is how we understand a bank run to be and what drives them?
Oh, sure. I usually talk about in banks, you have two different crises that can happen.
Okay.
Right. So one is the liquidity crisis, which is what we'd call a bank run.
Okay.
And this is just when you have more people want to withdraw money than you have in reserve.
Okay.
Right. So people are trying to take out 11% of their deposits. You only have 10.
Right.
Now you have a liquidity crisis. And that really just then raises the question, which you see in this movie, of where are we going to get the cash to deal with these people?
And in the absence of bank bailouts, what would happen? Just bankruptcy?
There are various options.
Okay.
It could be, I guess, assuming it's just purely a liquidity crisis.
Yeah.
The bank, if it's perfectly sound, it might be able to find investors that would be willing to lend or invest just to get through this day.
Okay.
That kind of thing. That's possible.
Right. Which is what Mr. Potter offers, but is turned down.
Right. Right. Exactly. And that is something we would actually see.
Okay.
I know that during the Panic of 1907, the story is told that J.P. Morgan kind of took the banking community and locked them all in a room until they figured out how they were going to deal with the crisis at that time.
Right.
We had a bunch of the smaller banks were running into problems. So he using the force of a lock and key and his personality worked out. The larger banks are going to invest in the smaller banks to make sure that we get through this.
Okay. Did they invest or did they just buy outright?
There's not much difference.
Okay.
Right?
Fair enough.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know specifically. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a lot of that.
Okay.
And we did see that kind of thing happen around the crisis of 2007 as well, where the Federal Reserve, one of the things that it did was facilitate this type of purchasing.
Right.
Where Chase stepping in and buying up a bunch of banks. J.P. Morgan Chase, interestingly.
Yeah.
Buying up a bunch of the
Long
banks that were
history.
having problems. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's one of the solutions out there for the liquidity crisis. The more severe issue is a solvency crisis.
Okay.
And this is what happens when you have the bank's assets are no longer enough to cover their liabilities.
Okay.
So,
does that make sense to you, Jeff? Do you need more detail on that?
Man, if only we had a blackboard.
Right.
So
no.
assets,
I would love it. So
assets is the money,
Right.
the
So let me-
money that you have. Liabilities is the money you owe.
Right.
So for a bank, this sounds very strange. Their assets are loans. So it's the money that people are going to pay back to them. Right. So when I
That's-
take out a
that's their
mortgage, the bank
assets.
owns the mortgage.
Interesting. Okay.
Right.
It,
Right, so-
and if that were my money, I'd consider it a liability. But I guess I see. Okay.
Because you're the one that has to pay the mortgage.
Right.
But the bank's on the other side of that.
Sure.
But if
So-
you give someone money, Nelson,
and
the
I'm
money they owe you is your asset.
Yeah.
In that perspective,
In
right?
that perspective.
Right.
Even in a non-business professional way.
Okay.
Right. Right. So
Interesting.
just a simple example of a solvency crisis would be I put $100 in the bank.
Okay.
The bank keeps 10 in reserve, lends out 90.
Right.
The person that borrows the 90 declares bankruptcy and is not going to pay it back.
Okay.
Now the bank has a problem because they still owe me $100.
Right.
Right.
They have 10 on hand. They're not going to get the other 90.
No.
Right.
Okay.
So even when people pay back their loans, they're not going to have enough
Right.
to pay off their depositors. And that's a really serious issue because it's not just, oh, I need to wait for your neighbors to pay their mortgages and then we'll be okay.
Right.
Your neighbors aren't paying their mortgages.
They're not
And
going to be able to.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Right. And that's when you end up with really serious problems. The fun thing about banking is that the two get connected. So what happens? So suppose that I'm not so confident that my neighbor's going to pay their mortgage.
Okay.
Then I start worrying that maybe this bank is never going to be able to pay me back
Right.
because my neighbor's not paying the mortgage. So there's no money
Yeah.
coming in to cover my deposits. I want to go get my money out before anybody else does that.
Right.
And then what a potential solvency crisis, or even the rumor of one, can turn then into a liquidity crisis.
Mm.
people rushing out to get their money before their neighbors declare bankruptcy so they can actually get their own money. Right? And it can also cut the other way. And that one of the other solutions for a liquidity crisis is that the bank could take this loan and sell it to somebody else. Right? So, so-and-so owes me $90. I really need the cash now. Will you buy this from me? So, so sell it to the bank across the street, that kind of thing.
We see that a lot with medical debt.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's one of the things that can happen. But if the liquidity crisis is broad enough, everybody's trying to sell these loans at the same time, and they lose value very quickly. So you try to sell this loan, you're not going to get $90 for it.
Right.
Everybody's trying to sell their loans at the same time.
And then savvy investors are picking up 50 cents on a dollar.
Exactly. So then
Which
the
is
bank
what Mr.
now
Potter
doesn't
was
get the $90.
trying to do.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, so there's lots of elements here. Like what caused that problem originally with the bank run, if you listen, Uncle Billy says that the bank called our loan.
Right.
This is another thing that banks will do to solve liquidity crises. If you have loans that to call the loan means that it was a loan with terms where the bank could just demand payment at any point in time.
Yeah.
And that was what happened, was apparently the building and loan had a loan out from the bank across the street.
Well, and that was Potter's,
with those terms.
right? That was Potter's bank.
Not,
Potter-
not just yet.
Okay, Potter hadn't
saved
bought it
that
yet.
bank.
Right.
Okay, Potter hadn't bought it yet
Yeah.
at this point.
Right.
So there was a
Okay.
bank run on that bank.
Okay.
Mr. Potter
That's
covers.
right. Okay.
They call in
I
their
got
loan,
ahead
and
of
after
it.
they call in
Okay.
all their loans, they still didn't have enough. Mr.
Right.
Potter covers the difference.
Okay.
Then he calls a savings loan because he knows that
He
they're
can-
going to have a bank
he
run
can
as well.
deplete it. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. I was ahead of it. Okay.
And that's where you get this interconnectedness of the system too.
Yeah.
Like the bank run across the street creates problems for us because they just took all of our money
Right.
when they called our loan.
Because it was technically their money,
Right.
but it's also the money of all of your customers.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a very tangled web.
I'm
it turns
enjoying
out.
this. This is great. Like, I feel like I'm in your class, Luke. This is awesome, Mr. Lucas,
Dr. Engelhardt.
Professor Engelhardt. Yeah,
Professor Dr. Engelhardt.
yeah.
The finals next week.
Sir, can I go to the bath? Can I use the restroom, please?
Hall pass.
How long have you been teaching? I just want to pause real quick. Just get how long have you been teaching?
15 years. Now.
15 years. Wow.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, started in grad school.
You look like you're 30.
Thank you.
Start teaching when you were 15?
39.
Okay.
Okay, so you're in there. Yeah, it's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. No, I started teaching my second year of grad school.
Right
Okay.
on.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Okay. Was there anything in the movie, or Nelson, if you had someone to go with this, okay. Was there anything banking wise, just because we're deep into this topic right now, that you saw was completely
Wrong?
incorrect about how banking either would have been like just for specifically entertainment value? Was there anything that happened in this movie that you saw? Yeah, that's not how that works. Like, not even as like a critical,
Right.
but just blatantly like, yeah, that was for storyline movement.
Like how software engineers look at hacking in movies.
Right.
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 Now, interestingly, nothing jumped out at me.
Okay.
Okay.
Like,
That's,
maybe
that's
if I
good.
sat and
yeah.
watched line by line, I might have been able to find something.
Yeah.
But no, like for me, the weirdest thing in the bank was the crow.
Yeah.
And the squirrel. And,
squirrel
and,
at his
and
house, yeah.
Bill, Uncle Billy had a squirrel on his shoulder. Like, yeah, they never acknowledged.
I think
The
that was to
animals.
establish that he's a very kind person.
I was like almost
Oh.
like Snow White type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it might be senility or something.
Like death is on
also
his shoulder or something. Like crows.
No, I think it was intended to kind of give you this idea that he's a very tender-hearted person, and I think the movie also creates a
so weird.
I think it's a fair kind of picture that kind-heartedness and business sense do not tend to go together.
He's a juxtaposition.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting because you often think about the contrast between George Bailey and Mr. Potter.
Yeah.
But I think there's a stronger contrast
Yeah.
between Uncle Billy and Mr. Potter.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Uncle Billy's got like things tied around his fingers to remind him that he needs to do stuff.
I mean, they all had their
There's no way to run a business.
and they all had their vices. Like Uncle Billy was a drunkard.
Yeah.
Like Potter was just arrogant and greedy and selfish and stuff. And then, I would say,
that
what
greediness-
would be George's vice? He's a yes man.
He's got a bit of a temper.
He does have a temper.
That's
But like
okay.
he,
Yeah.
I feel like he was not able to actually. He wasn't in control of where he was. Like if
Yes.
you would have asked like George, where do you want to be? Like if you're talking to high school George at the beginning of the movie, where do you see yourself? He is not where he wanted to be
Right.
when he became that age. So like I feel like every step of the way, George was not able to go the direction he wanted to go. He felt like he had to. So I feel like George's vice is just not being able to say no, or the confidence to just let go of things. So I kind of, in that aspect, I feel bad for him. Like he didn't have a choice. Granted, he got a good looking woman. He had a beautiful family. Like he had things that, in the end, he did see that it was a wonderful life. Spoiler alert. But I just think from his perspective, like it was very easy for him to overlook those things because all the steps that led to where he wasn't his choice.
I don't think
you can disagree.
Yeah, I think he had a choice. I think he felt responsibility, obligation, duty, however you want to phrase that.
But does obligation take from it being your choice? Like, because like there's some things you do out of obligation, which then inevitably it makes you feel like it's not a choice. Because like if you're obligated, it's not a choice.
He wasn't even coerced into these situations.
No.
In fact, people regularly encouraged him to do his own thing.
It's true.
And so it was very much a choice. And as to get a little bit more into the economics, as Mises would tell us, like he's making decisions all the way down. Right. Every situation that he finds himself in are because of the choices he has freely made.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
he's not always happy with the results, but that's life.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a wonderful one.
I get it.
See what I did there?
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Fascinating.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting thinking in that context now. That, like to me, a lot of what this is really getting at is I guess, learning, for lack of a better phrase, kind of the joy of simplicity.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So George has these big dreams of traveling the world and all of that, and that never happens.
Yeah.
Right.
Never happens. No. Many times he thinks he's going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But he can't do it. And
his wife even dialogues about trips and stuff in the future. So.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right. And it takes, the movie for him to figure out that, oh, wait, no, there's actually value in these things that while along the way, I felt this responsibility, this obligation, this pressure to give up on my dreams, to do this thing. It's coming to recognize that this thing that we felt obligated to do has its own beauty to it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
I like that.
He wanted to travel and see the world. Well, let's see. He puts his brother before himself. Then he puts his father before himself. Then he puts the saving loans before himself.
Well, before that, he the guy that was about to poison the kid.
Yep.
He puts kind of his job on the line because he's like, I got to run out and get this guy help because
Mr. Gower.
Mr. Gower. Yeah.
Right.
So even before that, like he makes a choice there. Yeah.
Yeah. We see early on, I think he takes after his uncle a lot. He's a very kind-hearted person. We don't see a whole lot of his father, or kind of get an idea of where the temper comes from. Right. But you get the impression that his father was the better businessman of the two. But they were both very compassionate in how they did business, which is not always a way to run an investment firm.
And even George's introduction,
put it lightly,
maybe not his introduction, but George's initial interaction that we see with Mary was, hey, I need you to dance with her. Just give her one dance. Give her the next dance.
Actually, no, it's before that. It's in The Pharmacist.
That when they're younger.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
he's
right.
just a total
they at that point he's not interested in girls, but even like I don't think they wouldn't have set them on that track if it wasn't for the dance. They're like, I don't think that was a defining moment for them at the pharmacy, but it was a defining moment for them at the prom or whatever it was.
Right.
He was dancing with her as a favor to his friend.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, you could tell from the very beginning, like the way they looked at each other, like, oh, hello. And she just hands him the drink. That dude the drink, like she just go away. Yeah. Hey, this is my dance.
Annoy somebody else.
So some guy comes up to him and says, "You have to dance with my little sister."
Right.
And I don't remember him popping up again, even at their wedding. Like I don't remember a scene with him again after that. No, and that's a little strange.
Yeah.
I want to read. So Mr. Potter is a really interesting character to me. 3 months after Peter Bailey dies,
yes, they have that meeting.
They have the board meeting.
Yep.
And I wrote down everything that Mr. Potter says. Because I do that. He says, "I claim this institution is not necessary to this town." Pause. I think that's a really interesting statement. Mr. Potter is an investor. That's where he's made his money and from shrewd investing. The movie throughout the whole thing paints him as a villain, but it's really not until the halfway point of the movie that he actually does anything wrong. He just lacks tact.
Morally questionable.
So he says, I claim this institution is not necessary to this town. And what he's saying there is because this business exists, we're just creating a larger and larger liability the longer we let it stand. Now, I think he was wrong, but he was making some keen observations based on what he was seeing. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to dissolve this institution and turn its assets and liabilities over to the receiver. To the public, Peter Bailey was the building and loan. Peter Bailey was not a businessman, and that's what killed him. I don't mean any disrespect to him, God rest his soul. He was a man of high ideals, so-called, but ideals with no common sense can ruin this town. And I want to pause there again because, especially from more the Austrian economics standpoint, that's very much, he's articulating the boom-bust cycle. Lucas, can you shed a little bit of light on how Austrians understand the boom-bust cycle?
Yeah, and it's actually often tied with our view of banking and the kind of the processes of a fractional reserve bank. And what ends up happening with the fractional reserve banking is that we end up with, it's not unlike what Mr. Potter is saying in some ways, where we have this, I guess you might say excessive liquidity or this excess of funds available beyond what would be there if people had to actually fully fund everything they had to fund, right? Including loans for that matter, right? So like if when I made a deposit, I was actually saying, no, take this $90, I will not have it, go lend it, I make different decisions. And if I say, oh, I still have that $100 and they happen to lend out 90. Right. So we end up with, I guess, excess funds in the loan market, which then end up pushing down the interest rate people have to pay on loans. So people who otherwise would not be able to afford loans now can, and we end up with them making investments that
they otherwise
eventually, right? They otherwise wouldn't, right? Exactly.
There's an analogy of a builder that's used a lot. Can you articulate that for us? Right.
So Mises uses the analogy of the builder, in that what he says is that it's like our fractional reserve banking system is sending this bad signal. Right? That is, it's like we have this master builder, say, building a housing development.
Okay.
And
which is exactly what they're doing in
right. Just, totally unrelated to this movie. We have somebody building a housing development. Right. And Mises says that what this excess liquidity is like somebody is telling the master builder, oh, we have however many bricks available to build houses. But they inflate this number significantly. So they tell you there are 3 times as many bricks as there actually are.
Either through the dishonesty or a legitimate mistake.
Exactly. So master builder gets the signal. It's wrong. He doesn't know that, though, because he trusts the people that work under him. So begins building a bunch of houses, planning on there being 3 times as many bricks as there actually are. Eventually you hit the point where it becomes obvious you don't have 3 times as many bricks as you actually have. Right. At which point you have to then change your plans. Right. So some houses don't get finished. We rip down, try to save as many bricks as we can to finish the other ones. Right. Houses that would have been 2 stories are now 1 story. Right? We have to make these adjustments. And something is lost in the process. You can't change plans without losing something. Sure. Right. Is really what that ends up boiling down to. And this is the analogy that Mises uses for the signal the fractional reserve banking system sends. Like those low interest rates make it look like people are willing to save a whole lot of money and lend it out. Right. What they're actually doing is depositing money thinking they still have it available to them. Of course. Right. And that then sends this negative signal, or not negative, but sends this erroneous signal. Right. Then we start planning our economy around this. And then it turns out, no, people actually weren't willing to do this. So the savings aren't there. Right. To back up the plans we want to make with them. Right. So from a certain point of view, Mr. Potter is, in his own way, being virtuous. I wouldn't go that far. Because I guess I tend to read this.
The real hero of the story.
Yeah. The real hero.
Not Clarence.
Yeah, obviously, he lies and defrauds them for $8,000 later. Right. But at this point in the story, like what I saw was he's seeing a market signal, right, that we're going to run into issues with the way that the building and loans is lending money, and we need to shut this down earlier rather than later. That's what I saw here. But I also might have been looking for it.
Right. Yeah, like, I guess no, this was something, it was interesting watching this movie because my wife asked me when we were watching, she said, so do you like Mr. Potter?
Yeah.
Because normally
That's a good,
my
that's a
character
good question.
type,
Yeah.
right? Like I love the old men with power.
Okay.
Right? It's
Okay.
like the Emperor in Star Wars.
The-
Love the Emperor. He's
What about the old guy from from Mary Poppins? Like the banker in Mary Poppins,
Dick Van
right?
Dyke?
right?
Yeah. No, not that one.
It's also Dick
The
Van
old
Dyke.
crotchety. Well, that's true. It is,
also Dick Van
that is true. I forgot about that. It is Dick Van Dyke. Yes. So yeah, the guy. Yeah.
Yeah, a fun character, or like Gandalf in
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
great. So it doesn't matter whether they're villain or hero.
You like old
men with
characters.
power.
Okay.
That's
old men
fun.
with power.
And Mr. Potter should fit that.
Right.
He's old. He has lots of power.
Yeah.
But I don't like him.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't have an explanation for that. Right. So I guess maybe this might be my own bias, just for whatever reason, not liking him. The way that I would read that line is what he's actually doing is we've established in the movie that he's a landlord.
Yes.
Right. As a landlord owning rental housing, he has to compete with home building,
Of course.
which is largely being funded by the building and loan in this town.
Right.
So I would see it more as he's realized he's competing with himself. He doesn't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And knows that he's going to make more money off of the housing that he can run as a good businessman than off of his investment in the building and loan, which
Sure.
is not going to be run well
Yeah.
from a purely business perspective.
Do you think he was? Do you
So
think
I think it was. I don't think he was being
Purely
virtuous
self-exploitative?
in terms of his intentions.
Okay.
when he gave George that offer for him to work for Mr. Potter?
Oh, I want to get to that.
Like, okay. Well, okay. Do you want me to wait
yeah.
on this question?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Okay. I'll wait. We'll come back to that. Okay.
Okay.
We'll come back.
So then the next thing he says is, now take this loan here to Ernie Bishop. You know, that fellow that sits around all day on his brains in his taxi. I happen to know that the bank turned down his loan, but he comes here and we're building him a house worth $5,000, which is $90,000 in today's money. Still a relatively, a very modest house by today's standards. A conversation for another time is how much government policy has inflated the cost of homes since I did the math on this, since the 1913s. A house in 1913 built in 1913, it would cost double to make today than it would have then. I think it's really interesting that he says that, and you're probably right that there's a lot of self-interest in trying to shut down the savings and buildings and loan. As somebody that sits on the board, he does have a split, conflicting interests.
Yes.
So absolutely, but still at this point in the movie, he hasn't done anything. He's been crafty, but he's not done anything that is. He hasn't defrauded anybody. He's been dishonest to a degree, but no right. All right, fraud.
Been obviously evil.
Yeah. And then later, of course, when Uncle Billy does Uncle Billy things, he steals.
Oh,
$8,000
Uncle
from
Billy.
them. He steals $125,000 from them by not disclosing that there was an accident.
Right.
I would consider that fraud. He's not been asked if he has it.
Right. He didn't
Take it,
well,
but he didn't return it when he had the
Okay.
opportunity.
However,
Right.
though,
Like,
did he
knew
know
what happened?
Wait, is it considered taking it when you know where it came from and you knew that it's not yours? At some point, like, I feel like it changes from, oh, I found to, oh, I know whose this is, I'm just not giving it back.
Oh, 100%.
I believe it does turn into taking.
Yeah.
Right.
I believe at that point, especially when he looked through the door and he realized that Uncle Bill was looking, I think at that point, that's when it turned into wrongfulness. Because if he would just, honestly, if he would have left it a mystery, be like, oh, I found $8,000, I'm not going to look into it, I'm just going to assume it's mine, then I'd have been like, oh, he's ignorant. But but when he was intentionally like,
Yeah.
oh, I know whose this is, I'm keeping this,
Yeah.
that's when he took it versus found it.
Right.
I guess I sort of distinguish between there are some things that are a jerk move
Yeah.
and some things that are really wrong.
Right.
It's like,
Yep.
oh, I found this $8,000. I'm not going to try to find whose it is.
Right.
That's a
Oopsies.
jerk move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then once he obviously knew that it was
Yeah.
Uncle Billy's here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that turned to evil.
During the bank run, he calls and offers 50 cents on the dollar. To the people experiencing the bank run, that's a generous offer. 50% is better than nothing.
Right. It's a line from the movie.
Right. And I'm sure from Mr. Potter's perspective, this is also a not only a move that he can afford to do, but it's a good move for him. Otherwise, he wouldn't offer it. The true value lies somewhere between 100% and 50%. Otherwise, he wouldn't have offered it. Right? He wouldn't have offered if he didn't think he was getting a deal. And then later, when they kind of revisit that, Mr. Potter says to George Bailey, "You and I were the only ones that kept our heads during the bank runs." Also, during the Mr. Bailey says to the crowd, "Look at what Mr. Potter's doing, establishing. Everybody knows Mr. Potter is good with money. So let's look at what he's doing with money. He's buying when you're selling, right? Because he's not scared,
Right?
And it's. Are you familiar with the inverse Kramer index?
From Seinfeld?
No.
No, not exactly, but I can imagine what it is.
Yeah. Yes. So there's look it up. It's the inverse Kramer index. I'll link it in the show notes. I can never remember his first name, but
Jim Kramer.
Jim Kramer of Mad Money. Yep. There is
the baseball bat, right?
Yeah, it's the guy with
the dude with the baseball bat. Yeah.
He has a long.
I've never watched it.
He has a long track record of, despite constantly offering terrible advice, he somehow still has a show where he offers financial advice and investing advice. And so the inverse Kramer index is anytime he's really passionate about something, they just do the opposite of what he says and they make off like bandits.
Really?
Yeah. So I see kind of this very similar to the inverse Kramer index of if the market is panic selling, it's a good time to buy. Right? People that are real passionate about Bitcoin like to say Bitcoin's on sale. It's not that there's a run on Bitcoin, it's that Bitcoin's on sale. Right. It's such a quick line that you could miss it. But the basic investment strategy, if lots of people are buying, it might be a good time for you to sell. If lots of people are selling, it might be a good time for you to buy. Right. So, and that's all I had to say on that.
Right. Bit. No, definitely. That's part of the scene that I show.
How long have you been showing that to students?
Let's see. I'm trying to remember if I did that in grad school at all. I don't think so. Sort of been about 12 years ago that I started showing that. Yeah,
just that scene though.
Yeah. The scene from when Mary and George pull up and Ernie stops the cab, and because they see there's something going on at the bank. Yeah. So
I've never
that
seen
all
a
the
bank
way
run, but I think that's what one looks like.
Right. Exactly. Right. So that all the way to when 6 o'clock hits and they have their $2 left. Yeah, I show that scene. And then also usually in the same class, I will show the bank run for Mary Poppins.
Yes.
Because there are also elements of that bank run that are very informative. Yeah.
Such a great movie.
Oh, yeah.
So not in the top 250.
My favorite movie as a child. And still one of my favorite movies. Yeah.
So George Bailey is making $45 a week, which works out to a salary of $2,340 a year in their money. $35,000 in modern money. Just the two of them, no kids. We don't get told specifically that the money.
We don't know what she does.
She is.
We know she went to school.
Yeah,
but we don't know what she does besides updating the house and fixing it.
Yeah, and they never at any point say that she works.
Yeah,
right.
But we know but we do know at some point she had money. So
yes,
yeah.
So $35,000 is not much. It's definitely below poverty line. And I think likely below poverty line in their time as well. And then Mr. Potter offers him $20,000 a year, which is $305,000 salary, which that's that's life-changing money.
Substantial.
Yes.
10 times as much, basically. Jeff, I'd
probably take it.
Yeah. It'd be a hard thing to decline. Yeah. So it was a 3-year contract. A 3-year contract at $305,000.
Mr. Potter said that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's basically in today's money, I will give you $1 million over the next 3 years if you come work for me. And you know that means that the savings and loans is likely going to go out of business.
Right. So my question was do you think Mr. Potter would have been, because George Bailey's a good businessman, not a great businessman, but he's a good, honest businessman to his clientele. Do you think George Bailey or Mr. Potter would have been a different person as far as a coworker or a boss versus a business enemy? Do you think the chemistry between them would have changed, or would it still have been negative, or do you think Potter would have just once it would have closed, would have kicked him out of his contract or something? Do you think there would have been manipulation or foul play if George would have been yes, I'll agree to this? Or do you think Potter was very upfront and I'm being for real. I can gain from you?
I think it's both. I think Potter wanted to see the buildings and loan go out of business. and also he knew that $20,000 a year for 3 years is how much value I think that I will get from you and more. Your thoughts, Lucas?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah, although, like, knowing what we know of Mr. Potter with the $8,000 that went missing,
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if he tried to weasel his way out of it.
Sure.
In the future, right? But I suspect he was, he also knows like there's a contract. The courts very well may enforce it,
Right.
So I suspect that he was willing to pay that,
Yeah.
to get rid of the competition, you
Right.
know?
The optimist in me would have been like, that'd have been a cool turn in the story. Like they become honest business partners, and Mr. Potter becomes, like his heart's going to grow 3 sizes, and and then they become like Bailey's able to keep his father's business, and because it's now being funded by Potter, and it turns off and it's now like Potter owns it, but Bailey's running it, and it's functional and it's got funding.
A little more compassionate.
Yeah, and then I'm like, that'd have been a fun story. He never would have contemplated suicide at that point. But then initially I'm like, no, Potter probably would have swept the rug right out of him, find a way to draw it out, and
Why do you
drown
think?
it out.
Why do you think George Bailey turns him down?
He knows the type of man Potter is. I think he knows the same reason why I'm like, I don't think if we would have seen that play out, I think we would have seen. I mean, look, when Clarence shows George the if you weren't alive, where would the town be scenario?
Right.
It turns into Potterville. So
I will say though, Potterville is booming.
Well, with right.
It's an interesting type of
Right.
booming.
Yeah, there's multiple businesses that are
seedy a little bit, but
morally questionable. Lots of
Right.
dancing girls, lots of more bars, less family atmosphere things. So it's definitely booming, but it's not. It's a different clientele.
Sure.
Of town people. So I think George knew Potter's long-term goals. That's obviously pre him seeing what it would have been with that. But just like they've interacted long enough. I mean, he's watched his dad run a business with Potter in the same town. Like he knows Potter.
Yeah.
He knows what Potter's out to get. And I think he knows like whether the first year is successful and we can make it work the first year. He knows that in the end, once George Bailey becomes unbeneficial,
Right.
he's gone.
He's a ruthless businessman.
Yes, through and through. And unless Potter has a Scrooge moment where he's visited by 3 ghosts, like in the Christmas theme, in the Christmas theme of this movie, right? They're all like unless Potter were to have a moment like that, Potter's going to keep on being Potter.
Yeah.
So I just thought that would have been an interesting turn. Like he took it. He took the deal.
Yeah. Yeah, I do kind of wonder what would have happened down that path.
In that question, or in that, I was doing this is sort of left turn, but just as we're talking about this topic, like, there was talks of a sequel, but it never got traction. And then there was talks. Let me bring up my fact here. There was talks of a reboot. Where's my note here?
I think you could reboot this well. I don't think you could sequel this
It's
well.
a Wonderful Life sequel was announced. A sequel was announced back in 2013 titled It's a Wonderful Life, the rest of the story, but it was canceled. And that's all I could find. This was as of 2018. So in 2013, there was a sequel to the story. Not a reboot, a sequel. But it was canceled before it even got off the ground in 2013. So I wonder if there would have been more continuation of the Potter Bailey story. I don't know. I'm curious what they would have done if it has anything to do with what we've been talking about.
Right. I
there
probably
was
would have focused on Clarence.
That's right.
He's having a struggle adapting to his wings.
Yeah. I get why they put him in there. I really think he takes away from the story, though.
Well, he does, but he doesn't. There's some very valuable dialogue between Clarence and Bailey.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially in the moments where Bailey's...
It just seems weird to introduce a comedic
wrestling.
relief 2/3 of the way through the movie.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, he's introduced.
I think there's
early.
been...
I suppose.
There's been comedic moments throughout the whole movie, though. Yeah. I mean, the pool opening up and then falling.
Yeah.
There's lighthearted moments
great.
the whole movie.
A thing on that pool.
It's a real pool.
That bothers me. I know, and it's
Okay,
it still functions.
Yeah.
And it's been used in other movies
Yes.
since.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. It's in Pasadena,
awesome.
right?
I think so. No,
Or
Beverly Hills.
Beverly Hills. Yep.
My issue with the pool is this. Beverly Hills is the kind of community that if you told me has a giant basketball court that has a pool under it, I'm like, yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
Syracuse, New York is not. They
Oh,
went to great,
the town it's based off of.
they went to great pains to establish this town as very modest
Yeah.
and not a ton of affluence.
Yeah.
And then they've got a basketball court that opens up with a pool
Yeah.
underneath it. And I'm like, yeah, it's a little bit of a suspension of disbelief there.
Yeah. And I love that they do try to explain this away.
Yeah.
With the principal saying, "Oh, it was a great idea. It's
Yeah.
saved
building-
us having to build another building."
The building and loaned the money for it too.
Yeah.
Wait, is that's real?
Yeah, and that's
I
what the
didn't
principal
catch
says
that.
to George Bailey when he gets to the dance.
That's fun.
They
Yeah.
kind of explain it real quick.
Right.
A fun fact about that: it's uncredited in the credits. But Carl Switzer, aka Alfalfa from the Little Rascals, the original Little Rascals,
Yeah.
he's the one that had the key that opened up the pool.
Okay.
But he's uncredited.
So that's the original
Sure.
That's Al played the character who pushes the button that opens the gym floor.
Okay. That
So,
makes that.
yeah,
So
so
that actually makes sense.
So that was the boy.
With
That was
that-
talking to Mary.
that
yeah.
was given the key and open. Yeah,
He didn't
Yep.
grow out of those freckles, did he?
No, he didn't.
so I thought that was interesting. I just recently watched the '90s version of the Little Rascals. Loved it.
I love that. I
It's
remember.
a fantastic.
Do you
movie.
remember the urban legend? And I'm pretty sure it's not true that Bill Cosby had bought the rights to the movie so that it wouldn't be played on TV because he felt it was racist. Did you ever hear that?
I've never heard
No, I've never heard
that.
that.
I
I
remember
mean,
hearing it
are we allowed to
several
talk
times.
about Bill Cosby?
Sure.
Is that?
He never did that. I met Bill Cosby a year before his
Are you serious?
scandal came out. Yeah.
You met him.
Wow.
How?
Yeah.
What was that like? Can we
was-
talk about this right now? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
I was in the Austin airport making a connection. I was taking one of the trams. He sat down next to me on the tram with his two giant.
He did have security guards. Okay,
Yeah, two
okay.
giant security guards with him. He's very blind. Needed help
okay.
finding his seat. And then across from us was an older black lady who started fangirling immediately. And he was an absolute gentleman with her and with me and with anybody that came up and spoke to him. But he sat,
Watch your hands.
Oh yeah, I'm thumping a lot. He sat right down next to me. And he just a real charming guy.
I'm actually named after a Bill Cosby sketch.
You're named after a Bill Cosby sketch?
So, and it's and anyone of our listeners can Google this. He has a stand-up bit where he's on a plane.
Yep.
And
No,
there's
I
a
know
kid,
exactly.
there's a
Yeah.
kid behind him who's annoying, and he goes, Jeffrey, 4 years old. Jeffrey, 4 years old. and it's just Bill Cosby describing this experience of this kid behind him on the plane. My parents watched that while they were pregnant with me, and so I'm named after a Bill
Yep.
Cosby sketch. Yeah,
Yeah, that's from Bill Cosby himself. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I do find him funny. Whether I don't condone anything he did or didn't do.
Right.
Whether I haven't been keeping up on the trial, whatever. Like I don't condone those actions, but as an entertainer, I did love his show and his movies. Fat Albert, I loved Fat Albert.
There's always the complexity of separating art from artist.
right. I mean, even biblically, I mean, like there's biblical people that we admire and we look after and we model ourselves after. David, Moses, like Noah, like they did all these diabolical things even after God used them. So like I am one to look past discretion sometimes.
Right.
Indiscretion, sorry. Look past indiscretion sometimes if it's for So, but yeah, I am a fan of Bill Cosby at the entertainment level.
Yeah, his
And I'm
comedy
also
special
named
himself
Oh, yeah,
is
it's-
one of the best comedy
incredible.
specials ever.
Yeah.
There's two jokes I want to repeat from it real quick, and then we'll move on. There's he wakes up early. His kids come downstairs and they ask him for breakfast, so he starts making breakfast. And his youngest daughter sees some chocolate cake sitting on the counter, and she's like, "Dad, can I have chocolate cake?" And he's like, "You know what? I'm a cool dad. Sure, why not?"
Yep.
Gives his daughter chocolate cake for breakfast. And his wife comes downstairs and, "Why are you eating chocolate cake?" He's like, "And my daughter sold me out. Dad made us eat it." He's like, "Well, before that, they're singing, 'Dad is great. He gives us the chocolate cake.'"
That actually probably, I think that made it into one of his episodes of the Cosby
Probably
Show.
did.
Yeah.
And then he almost never used strong language in his
No,
jokes,
mhm.
but there's one that
For
he
the most
did,
part,
and it
yeah.
always stuck with me. He's like, "I got people that work for me that they spend all week saving up money to go and ruin their weekend. And he's like, one of the guys like does a lot of cocaine, and I was like, I don't understand what the deal is with cocaine. They're like, well, it amplifies your personality. He's like, well, that's great, but what if you're an asshole?
Yes.
All right, that's enough Bill Cosby talk for this episode that had nothing to do with him.
Yeah. I really liked his role in It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As Annie's
blink, you
future
miss it.
ex-husband.
Yeah, if you blink, you blink, you miss it. Yeah.
Let's see. So one thing that I really related to George with in this movie, Jeff, you've got a very young daughter, so I don't know how much you'll relate to this. Lucas, you've got kids of varying ages, so you might experience this a little bit more. George comes home Christmas Eve. His day has been terrible, and he's just short with everybody.
Yeah.
And
he's ruthless.
And that's certainly something that I can relate to more as a father now. Money and work issues pop up. I was recently thinking, I get home from work, and it's not a disaster area, but there are some things that need picked up in the living room and dining room.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very short with my kids. And the whole time I'm remembering when I was their age, my dad getting home from work, being very short with us until the living room and dining room was clean. And I was like, I love my dad. I've got a great relationship with my dad, but I'm just like, I get it, Dad. And so I really empathized with George in this scene. And I also empathized with his own frustration with himself when he realized he was being short with his kids.
I mean, he was at the bottom.
Yes.
I mean, he was. Yeah. And I think they depicted that well.
It's not even at the bottom. Like I could have just a bad day. Not I'm about to be arrested because $125,000
I got
is
you.
missing. Bad day.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
And then a little bit of an interaction that the movie opens up with, and then kind of comes full circle 2/3 of the way through. Is Daddy in trouble? Yes. Yes, Pete. Shall I pray for him? Yes, Janie. Pray very hard. And then shortly after that, we see George in Martini's, and he is praying and says, Lord, I'm not a praying man. And I'm thinking, okay, so then where do these kids get this instinct from? Like it must be from mom.
The comic books.
But the comic books. As a praying man, I would like for my kids' first instinct when they see issues like this to be, should we pray? I don't think that my kid's first instinct would be that, and that's something I think I should probably be working on more. But what did you guys think of that scene?
Yeah, no, it was definitely like, if I put myself in that perspective, like I would love for that to be the first reaction. I agree with that. It did. In the whole movie, like the movie starts out with Clarence and Joseph, right?
It's unclear, but two other names.
Right, yeah.
Right,
No,
like,
Joseph is one of the names.
Yeah. But like they never depict the Bailey family as a faith believing family.
Right.
They do show them in a church at one scene, or they show the inside of a church one scene.
And they say that George Bailey prayed on VE Day and VJ Day.
Right. And that was the same time that they showed the inside of the church. And then he at the bar at Martini's even says, like, I'm not a praying man. It's like, we don't know if he's a man of faith.
Right.
So like,
well, he says, God, if you're up there.
Right.
So I would say that that's not a man of faith.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So I did find it like, it was kind of, I felt there was that for me, this movie, that was the hardest believing part, was the connection of the angel to George. Like, I don't have any basis for this, but like, I feel like angels would be going after the people that are in constant talks with them, like the people that are already on the team versus like these,
if you were to take a theology of angels just from scripture, guardian angels don't show up hardly ever.
Right.
But if we were to use just like some mathematics from scripture,
Bible math, this is
Bible
great.
Math.
Oh.
So I remember working this out years ago, but we see in scripture that a third of the angels were knocked out of heaven, and it describes them as stars falling at that time. And we also know that there's roughly like 3 trillion stars that we're aware of in the sky. All right. And so already there are like demons that torment us are outnumbered 2 to 1, but also just the quantity of stars that there are divided by the amount of people that there are, like you're more than
more than enough angels.
There's more than enough angels for all of us to have a guardian angel, if such a thing is doctrinally accurate. So the math on it, I believe that George might have a Clarence. I don't know how I don't think that the doctrine of guardian angels is true to Scripture. I don't think that's the role of angels. I think the role of angels is to glorify Christ and God, and not to protect us first and foremost.
And they deal on a spiritual level, or like a metaphysical, spiritual level.
There are
verses,
and outside of Christ, I can't think of any situations where angels were sent to minister to somebody.
Ooh, you're quizzing me. I
mean, you're a youth pastor. You should be able to figure this one out, Jeff. I only assist.
My
with
theology is Veggie Tales, and a little bit of Dave Ramsey. You know, so. I only have an associate's degree.
See, I can only think of one situation where angels were sent to minister to somebody. That was Jesus after the 40 days. After the 40 days and after being tempted. Angels were sent to minister to him, and that's the only time I can think of that happening. I think a lot of the pop culture theology on angels that we have is. I
mean, angels were outside the tomb. Angels were there. There's multiple moments where angels are in the scene. Or in the moment,
usually followed quickly by "Don't be afraid."
Right. But never in a "I'm here to protect you or save you." I don't think. Yeah, I think you're right. I don't. Correct us if we're wrong. I mean, please, if there's any theologians listening,
that's not to say that that's not the case. It's not to say that God doesn't use angels to assist us and minister to us and all that. I don't see that directly in the Scripture, so I'm not comfortable saying, this is the way it happened.
Yeah. So going back to the initial question, the spiritual aspect for me in the movie was very, I don't know. I could have used more of that. Like I would have loved to have seen more connection of him and a God figure, or to a connection to the angels. Like I wanted more of that.
Yeah.
I believe that's what we were talking about.
Yeah. I think it's really funny that the bridge keeper says it's against the law to commit suicide around here. Which, like, I understand almost all cultures have that against the law. It's this goofiest law.
It is.
Like, what are you going to do? Kill him?
How do you punish someone who's committed suicide?
Yeah.
I'm not pro suicide at all.
At that point, you can only punish those that have attempted.
Right.
And those people need help more than they need.
Yeah. That's not.
But then the Clarence says, it's against the law where I'm from too. Where are you from? Heaven. Okay.
Yeah, that was a pretty good line.
Yeah, a lot of the dialogue in this is really clever, and I wonder how much of it is, because I know kind of in like pop culture zeitgeist, black and white movies, we kind of have this image of a lot of quips.
Yes.
And I wonder how much of it is that people back then were quippier, or was it just that movies back then were quippier?
Well, I guess
I like the word quip.
Right. Well, as I think about it, they couldn't rely as much on special effects.
Right.
It was all practical. Well, there was some green screen or some them in front of a projector.
Right. Yeah, they could do that. Yeah. But like dialogue had to carry the movie.
Right. The snow in this movie.
They filmed this in the summer.
I know.
Yeah.
At that time, this was the first movie that the artificial snow wasn't painted cornflakes.
Yeah.
Because
Rice Krispies. That is not truth.
Who's the director? I can't think of his name.
Frank Capra.
Frank Capra wanted to be able to record dialogue in the snow. And if you have cornflakes everywhere, it's too loud.
Crunchy.
So it was the first time that they didn't do cornflakes, and instead what they did was a combination of soap, water, and foamite, which is the foaming agent in fire hydrants.
Interesting.
Fire extinguishers.
Right.
So there's a lot of time where you can see, like, on the car, the snow is landing and it's just kind of like this sliding goo.
This is the most flame retardant movie to date.
So yeah, it was the first movie to use foamite in place of snow, which became common for a time.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah. And then I've only really got a few more lines here. Of course, Bert and Ernie.
Well, I have a fact on that. Yes. I have a fact on that.
Yeah.
You may already have this, Nelson. So if you want,
I knew it, but so I didn't write it down. But go ahead.
I have an article here that talks about this. Bert and Ernie were not named after these characters.
Yep.
It just happened to be a coincidence. Mm-hmm. But there was speculation for a while that because Jim Henson loved this movie.
Right. I think it's one of those things where like it embedded into his brain. Mm-hmm. So he just accidentally did it.
Right. But so there's the quote that I have is He assured me that Ernie and Bert were named one day when he and Jim were studying the prototype puppets. They decided that one of them looked like an Ernie and the other looked like a Bert. The movie character names are purely coincidental.
Yeah.
Which, again, it could be because of influence.
Right.
Like, so there could be a connection there, but Jim Henson verbally disconnected the actual connection of Bert and Ernie and Ernie and Bert. But I did, as soon as they said those names, I'm like, Sesame Street.
Yep. That's what I said to my wife when we were watching. Like, Sesame Street.
And the funny thing is, Bert and Ernie share a bunch of scenes. Their names get said a lot, but it's not until the honeymoon sequence when they're singing and they say Bert and Ernie are like, no, sorry, it's not the honeymoon. It's when he goes to the house and they're tracking him down because he's a crazy person.
Right, he doesn't exist.
George calls them Bert and Ernie, and you're like, oh. So I think even though Jim Henson didn't do it intentionally, I think that they are still named after him. It's just like one of those parallel thinking things.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that was fun. The director did not intend this to be a Christmas movie. In his mind, this was not a Christmas movie, and we are watching this because it's December. You're listening to this episode because it's
our previous episode was Die Hard,
right? So, but Frank did not see this as a Christmas movie. He didn't like, and granted, I don't know if Christmas movies were a thing back then either. Like if that was a category of movie, they could have been, but this was not his intention for it to be a classic. And in the facts that I was able to find, this movie didn't become popular till the 70s. So 30 years later.
It's because networks bought it up,
right?
Because they sold off the asset because nobody liked the movie,
right?
So networks bought it and started airing it on Christmas.
And this was one of Frank's last movies, as well,
Interesting.
because
and it's his favorite that he made.
Yeah, same with James Stewart.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
this is James Stewart's
favorite,
according to the facts I found. This is all
interesting.
But yeah, so this we consider it a Christmas movie. I know I do.
Yeah,
I know a lot of the movies not during Christmas season, but I think it's more Christmas than some movies that are Christmas movies.
Mm-hmm.
But the director Frank did not consider this a Christmas movie.
Yeah, he's wrong.
We'll tell him.
So I got two more lines from the movie, both from Clarence. One's written, one's spoken. The first is spoken here. Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives. Mm-hmm. When he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he? What do you think of that?
I mean, I think that this part of the movie where everything kind of falls together.
Yeah.
And he's
starting to tie it up.
He sees the butterfly effect essentially. Which butterfly effect? Is that movie on the top 250?
I'll look it up right now.
I don't think it is. I just went through the list. I was immediately thinking of that. I was like, wow, like there's very much that same synopsis of like, because you did this, because you saved this.
Butterfly effect is like the Halloween version of It's a Wonderful Life.
Because you saved your brother, because you like the trajectory of just the small choices he made, like impact. Like I thought that was beautiful. Like whether we don't really know the weight of our choices until we're years ahead, but like I think that's a beautiful scene. And so that specific line, I do think there's weight to that. And I think it's a beautiful thought for us to dwell on, and just like, something just to think about as we live our lives and stuff. Just like you don't know the impact you have on people.
Yeah,
like you don't know. Like
and that's
I like that.
I've not read the book, and I've only seen glimpses of episodes. But 13 Reasons Why
I've not
was very much kind of trying to bring the same message.
Yeah.
From what I understand, the book does a better job than the show does, of just you're not. No one person can know how many lives they touch.
Right.
So my best friend in high school died shortly after high school.
Okay.
My younger sister was still in high school at the time, reached out to his younger sister to say, hey, if you ever need to talk, my sister doesn't remember that, but my friend's younger sister does. And years later brought it up. Right. And so you never know. Yeah.
Yeah.
You never know what these small, seemingly inconsequential moments can become moments that set your life on a course.
Yeah.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on this, Lucas?
No, absolutely. It's the message that every life matters to the other lives around it.
Right.
And in ways, we definitely can't predict. It is the butterfly effect. Yeah.
And we may never even be able to, we may not ever know the impact. Like we're here today because of people we know and people we don't know.
Right.
Like there's things in my life that have been outcomes of someone else's decisions that I've never even met.
Right.
And I'm, like, and it's just, I
almost guaranteed that part of the reason that my parents are together is because there was another boy that liked my mom that didn't say anything.
Right.
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 And I'm here because of his inaction. Right?
Look, I mean, like this may be off topic. You can edit this out. But like I love history. I love Civil War specifically. I love that era of history, learning about it, because I found out I had an ancestor that fought in all 4 years of the Civil War. Oh, and it was that one little nugget that kind of blew my mind of like, if he would have died at any point in the Civil War, I wouldn't be here. I never met the guy. I never met his children. I don't think I've met his children's children.
Right.
But like, and actually, there could be another generation there that I'm
Thank
apart
goodness
from.
The Confederates had terrible aim.
But like, that's another episode. But like, it's just like, I'm here today because my great ancestor survived, and he survived because of the battalion he was like. So just like, we are here today because of people we've never met. I think that's fascinating.
Right.
Like. And you can take that on a spiritual level too. Like you can take that beyond to a theological, spiritual aspect. But like, there's so much power in that, and knowing that what you do matters to things that you can't even comprehend. Our lives are so much bigger than what we can fathom, and we have value. Like, it's just not to take this to an emotional end. But I think that,
how dare you?
And for me, like, I think that was the takeaway for me in this movie was just like, wow, like. And being in a better headspace watching this movie, someone was like, man, like I feel like I'm making a difference now.
Yeah.
Like, because I definitely, when the last time I watched this movie, I definitely didn't feel like I was making a difference.
On the topic of headspace, it's really interesting how much cynicism gets in the way of us receiving truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Like I have a long history of struggling with depression. And I know conceptually when I'm depressed, what I need to do is something. Just go do something. Choose to be happier.
Yeah.
And that is also the least helpful advice when I'm experiencing seasons of depression.
Right. It's the last thing you want.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think
no energy.
exactly. It's like people are like, why? What do you have to be depressed about? I'm like, well, that's not really how it works, is it? and so like when we're cynical, like when we're not in a good headspace, that cynicism can really get in the way of real profound truths that are good for us and help us, and that we get in our own way.
One thing this makes me think about, because like certainly I have no idea, right, the impact that, say, my life will have generations later, or the generations before have had on mine. But I sometimes like to try the exercise of, well, what if I had made this choice differently?
Yeah.
What if I had gone to a different college, right? That kind of thing. How would that affect my life path? And you very quickly hit a wall.
Yeah.
That's going to change so many things,
Right.
that I can't even imagine it. Yeah. So when I think about this movie now, okay, what would have happened if George Bailey had taken Mr. Potter's deal?
Right.
What path does that set him down?
Yeah.
What would have happened if he said, well, my brother's not going to take the savings and loan. I'm not either. Right? And left.
Yep.
Yeah.
What would have happened if Mary hadn't said, we have $2,000?
Yeah.
Right. Let's just let this play out. We're going on our honeymoon, right? Or I guess going back even further, if George hadn't said stop the car,
Yeah.
Just these little decisions all
Add up,
right, to the wonderful life.
Yeah.
If I hadn't been in a position to jump in the water and save my little brother, right?
Yeah.
Then
Right.
you've got the whole ship goes down because of that airplane.
Yep.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And from a spiritual perspective, faith-based, from where I'm looking at this, like, it's in those moments that, like, it doesn't matter what decision you chose, yeah, maybe there was a better option versus not, but like, God can still use you in whatever option you do pick, and so like, there's redemption in any of those moments that you pick. And maybe one was greater than the other, but like, unless there's, as long as there's breath in your lungs. And even after that, like I know lives have been changed because of a passing, it's like there's even moments after death that you can have an impact on someone. So like, and I guess this is the reason I'm saying is, I'm trying to be cautious to our listeners. Like, if you're listening out there and like, we don't want to stress you out, but they say like, don't eat the wrong sandwich today or you're going to change the world. But just like, obviously try to make
as much as your choices have consequences and you impact all kinds of people around you, God ultimately is larger than the sandwich you had for lunch, and
you're not going to
there's
surprise
there's
God.
redemption in that. Yeah. So to take the stress off you listeners, which we're glad you're listening. Like, I think that's all beautiful. As deep and dynamic as is what we're talking about. There's freedom in going. You know what? It doesn't matter. Like in some situations,
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to pick one and see how it goes. Like, I think that's also incredible.
One of my mentors when I was younger, he was a longsword combatant when he was a youth, and was quite good at it. And he had an opportunity to go on foreign missions into what was then the USSR, and he spent a lot of time in prayer. Like, what should I do? Do I pursue this path, or do I stay back and continue training with a broadsword, because he was quite good and had a lot of opportunities there as well. And he kept praying, God, like, I don't know which of these is what you want for me, so can you just close a door on one?
Yeah.
And like, he kind of gave it like a month or two, and nothing changed. And so he just chose, and he chose to go on and do missions. And then years later, he lived in New Zealand. He grew up in New Zealand, and years later, he sees all of his friends as extras in Lord of the Rings, and so he's like, and for him, this was what was for me if I had chosen not to go, and and I don't regret the decision I made.
Right.
But it's not very often that we get to see for ourselves, like what might have been had we stayed, right?
Yeah.
I would have been orc number 3, you know.
That's the best orc, by
yeah.
the way, of all the orcs.
So I always thought that kind of always stuck with me, because I was trying to get some guidance from him on some options I had, and he's like, this is what I did. And I was like, how'd that work out? He's like, well, not great. I couldn't decide, and but he's like, pray about it, and then hopefully God will make it clear, and if not, trust that both options are equally good.
Yeah, I think it is funny how often we try to put out a fleece, and then God laughs at us.
Yeah.
So I remember in high school, I had a friend who was debating between 2 colleges that she was thinking about going to. She said, "Well, this one place, it's more expensive, so if I get a half tuition scholarship, I'm not going there. If I get a full tuition scholarship, I'll go."
Right.
She got a 75% tuition scholarship.
What do you do with that?
Or my wife was similar. Like, okay, I applied to these different programs. I'm not sure which program I want, so I'll go where I get in. Gets in all of them.
That's funny.
Right? And then you just have to trust that you're making the best decision that you can.
Right.
Yep.
We don't know.
And know that God works out all things for those to the betterment of those who love him.
Exactly.
I think
you ready to
let's
wrap
do the
this
wrap-up
up?
questions.
All right. We have 4 questions here. As you listeners know, we like to ask the same questions as we close this out. So first of all, we'll just go around the table here really quick. Would you recommend this? And I'll go first here. So I'm asking. Yes. If you would have asked me the last time I watched this, I probably would have been like, no, you're dumb if you think this movie is great. Like it's harsh. He's aggressive. Like the way he shakes people and kisses people. Like and this is probably my first and only introduction to Jimmy Stewart at this point. So like I have not seen any other Jimmy Stewart movies.
There's a couple others in the top 250.
But now I'm like, yeah, I like it, and I get why it's a classic.
Yeah,
and I appreciate it, and like, yeah. So yes, for me, I would recommend it.
Lucas,
I agree with Jeff. Yeah,
I don't hear that often.
I would not have said that a few years ago.
Yeah.
But this
in fact, you wouldn't have said this a few weeks ago.
Right? Yeah.
Like when I first approached you, you said, "I want you to know, Nelson, I don't like this movie."
Right. And then rewatching it 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Right? And my opinion totally flipped.
Yeah.
And I still don't like the one line toward the very
Which
end
line?
when Zuzu, for some reason, right. And she has like
My
the most
ginger
grating voice on my ears and declares that every time a teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings.
Right.
And I think,
Bad theology.
Yelling at the teacher may not have been the wrong choice, actually, George. That might have been okay.
Yeah, for that reason alone.
Yeah.
Right. So
how dare you?
Right. But like apart from that, don't watch that line.
Right.
It's a
And
little
the rest
too
is
cheap.
very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the pacing was good. It kept my interest. It
And
has good messages.
It felt like a classic movie. Like,
It does.
And I like. I don't want to be that guy that doesn't like any of the classics. And so for me, it's like, okay, there's a classic I can throw in my arsenal. Because there's some movies, which even on the top 250 that we'll eventually get into, I know I don't like, and I'm pretty sure I won't like the second time.
Yeah.
But like, I like that there's a class, at least one classic I can go, yeah, This one's good.
I think
Nelson?
I absolutely would recommend it, and I think going forward, I'm going to remember this experience because oftentimes when I mention this movie, it has a very polarizing effect. People either love it or they hate it.
Right.
And I think going forward, when people say that they don't care for it, I'm just going to be like, well, what kind of mental space were you in last time you saw it?
Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, absolutely.
Because cynicism, I think, really destroys this movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, to be fair, I don't think that's what ruined Clockwork Orange for us.
Hey, you found a way to tie it
I found
in.
it. Yeah. So
That was our second
that was
episode,
our
and
second-
we've brought it up every episode since.
right. So it had to be done.
Yeah,
I don't
I
think
did not
cynicism
like
was the
that.
reason we didn't like that movie. I just want to make that clear.
It's growing on me. I think I'll watch it again soon.
So okay, next question. This movie is rated PG. Would you guys change the rating? Just for listeners,
it's
was
fine.
there?
Yeah,
I
I
agree.
would
I think
keep
this
it.
is family friendly.
I mean, there's alcohol and tobacco use, but that
it does depict someone drunk driving. There is drunk driving in it.
yeah.
Right.
There is some violent moments and talk of suicide. So there are adult themes, but I don't think it's done in a way where it glorifies any of that.
I think this is a good PG movie, like parental guidance, right?
Correct.
Right.
It's
Yes.
not you don't
G.
set it on
It's
and
definitely
walk
not
away
G.
from it and let your kids watch it. This is a movie that you watch with your kids.
Right.
Yeah. If anything, the concern would be the kids might not find it interesting.
Right. Yeah.
That's it.
Absolutely.
Second to last question here. Has it aged well?
I think it's aged really well.
Yeah.
Surprisingly well. Yeah.
Yeah, like we discussed with pacing and dialogue, it's great. There are things that to our more progressive minds seem out of place, like women are, I wouldn't even say second-class citizens, but they're not given the same
Right.
amount of respect.
We
as
get
men.
less information on all the women characters.
Right.
Like
Right.
they do seem secondary in this movie.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say second-class citizens, but very secondary characters.
I agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'd be willing to wager that if we could go and talk to somebody in 1946, I think this movie is progressive for its time.
Yeah.
That's an assumption of mine.
I do think this. I would, for me, like I would love to not see this movie remade.
Yes.
I am a purist in some forms. Where like there are some movies, please don't remake this. Please don't do a sequel. And I'm only saying this because I just recently experienced this with A Christmas Story. They did not need to make a sequel to this. And this may not be the platform to talk about this, but like I love A Christmas Story, which I know is not on the top 250.
Is it in
so
top 250?
it's not.
It's not. These
But
are
like-
the only two Christmas movies: Die Hard and It's a Wonderful Life.
But like I haven't even watched the sequel yet. It may be a good movie, but it did not need to be done. Like some things need to be left alone and just left the way they are. And I do think, going back to this question, this movie, keep it untouched. Keep it the way it is.
Yeah.
Don't touch it. Let it do what it's already doing. Don't touch it.
I think you could remake it well. I think there's so much opportunity for error in a remake of
Right.
this that it's not worthwhile.
Well, it's the synopsis has been done. The whole
Sure.
like, what's your life look like if you don't exist? That's been done.
Right.
So like, it essentially has been redone in different variations of removing yourself from a story and then going, oh wow, I did make a difference. Like it's like it has been done in that
Also,
concept.
even with Christmas movies, I think Family Man,
I'm actually with Nicolas Cage, right?
Nicolas
I've not
Cage.
seen that
Yeah.
movie.
I think the whole premise of that movie is like, what would my life have been like if I hadn't married my wife?
Oh,
or
wow.
something like
Okay.
that.
Okay.
So it's very
Very
much
similar.
a similar concept.
and that is considered a Christmas movie as well
Yeah.
too. It's on So I would love to see this not be touched.
Yeah,
Keep it the way it is.
It's a good time capsule.
It actually has been. They did redo it in color. So
A few times.
The version I watched was black and white.
Yeah,
but
same.
I know it has been touched up in color a couple times. Never remade, but just digitalized,
Colorized. Yeah.
Last question. Unless you had any more thoughts on that.
Well, I would say on the Has It Aged Well, more in the second half than in the first half. There's a lot of smash cut edits.
Yeah,
Which
was common for that day.
it was more common back then, and that part, like at first I thought that, like I rewound because I thought that
Oh no.
there'd been a streaming error of some sort.
Right. Yes.
But it's just different editing techniques. We have more nuanced editing techniques now.
And I did have some. I will say this right now.
Not nuanced, more sophisticated editing techniques. That's the word I wanted.
Okay. And just for your listeners out there, I had someone ask, one of our listeners asked, as we go through these episodes, currently today, as we're listening, this movie is only available on Amazon Prime.
Okay.
It's not currently on any streaming services. So this may change as you're listening, but if you're keeping up to date with our episodes and you're listening as they air, this is currently only on Amazon Prime that I can see for legal purposes, legally to view. All right, last question.
Digital properties, not real property.
Right. Would this be
Or, sorry, intellectual properties.
the toughest question to answer? Would this be in your top 250?
Yeah. I think that's the first time I've said yes to that question, too.
It might be. Yeah.
Okay.
Would it be...
Can you name 250 movies, Lucas?
Right now,
Let's
go.
Let's challenge you. Start.
I don't think I've seen 250 movies, actually. So, yes.
Okay.
Would you put it in your top 5 Christmas movies?
That was going to be my next question. I'm glad you asked that. Okay.
Oh.
You don't need to
I
list your
don't know
5,
that
but
I would.
okay.
No?
No. It might be close.
Do you know your top 5 Christmas movies?
Not off the top of my head, but I do have a soft spot in my heart for
Gremlins?
3 of the rank. No, actually. No, that's one, like that one I didn't remember was a Christmas movie until my wife reminded me. We watched it again a year or 2 ago.
I love it.
Right.
I need to rewatch that.
No, but 3 of the Rankin Bass stand out, as I know are definitely up there. Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
Okay.
That's probably my favorite
Yeah.
That's
to
awesome.
watch. And then
That's animated, right? Like that's the
claymation.
I love that. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, like that, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty the Snowman. I just have great nostalgia attached to those 3.
Okay.
I never watched those as a kid, so I don't have that same...
For satanic reasons.
That's right.
Were they-
I don't have the same nostalgia for those.
Yeah.
Right.
But one that I think gets overlooked a lot for Christmas movies is Charlie Brown Christmas. That's one of my dad's favorites. So my dad loves all the Charlie Brown holiday
Yeah, no, they're great. Charlie Brown is classic.
my dad.
Yeah.
does.
Even the new Charlie Brown movie that's out, like the new, like that was a well done movie. I appreciated that. So yes to top 250 maybe for Lucas. For me, I would say definitely yes, top 250. And my next question was going to be top 5 Christmas movies. For me, no, it is not in my top 5 Christmas movies.
I think it would be in mine.
Okay, that's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. It's certainly my favorite Christmas movie that features fractional reserve banking.
Well, in that perspective, yes, absolutely. And
It is one of my favorite documentaries about economics, as far as that goes.
Yeah.
Well, that pretty well wraps things up here. But Lucas, where can people find you if they want to find you? Or do you want to be found?
I don't know if people want to find me, actually. Let's see, my website, which doesn't have much on it, to be honest, is lucasmengelhardt.com. Good luck spelling it correctly.
I'll make sure it's in the show notes.
Yeah.
Right. And you can also find me on Facebook.
Nice.
That's the social that I actually use.
And you recently wrapped a creative project, right?
Yes. Yeah. We just finished up a podcast, my wife and I and a couple of our friends from college, where we watched all of the Hercules, the Legendary Journeys, and Xena Warrior Princess
I love
episodes. Yeah. It's a Mount Olympus podcast.
Okay.
Do you know how many episodes you went through?
Oh, let me. I'm trying to remember how many it was now.
Can I look it up real quick?
You go ahead and look
Okay.
it up.
Is it
I don't
on
remember off the top
Spotify?
of my head. Yeah, it's
Anywhere podcasts.
yeah, anywhere podcasts are found. You can.
What's it
find
called?
us.
Olympus?
Yeah,
Mount
Mount
Olympus.
Olympus.
Mount Olympus.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mount
listened to
Olympus
a couple. It's good.
podcast. Yeah.
I strongly recommend it.
Yeah, I say very little in that, but I have
Mount
good
Olympus
co-hosts.
University? No.
No, Mount Olympus podcast is the name of that.
It'll be linked in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I want to say it was 250 episodes, a little bit over that.
And then you also do some writing and presenting through the Mises Institute.
Yes. Yeah, you can find my talks on YouTube easily.
Excellent. I recommend finding his talks, and his talks through Mises University are fantastic. If you're into wonky economic type stuff like I am, if you're not, you'll find it pretty dry. But he's one of the livelier presenters there.
Yeah.
Anything else, Jeff?
I was trying to find this podcast.
It may be harder to find than you think.
Scrubbed from the internet. Yeah.
I do want to find that because I'd love to see how many episodes. Lucas, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh yeah, thanks.
This
for
was a
having me. It
pleasure.
fun.
I learned a lot. I as someone like I do not like academic talk when it comes to like numbers.
He makes it so approachable. Doesn't
Like
he?
not that we talked about specific math equations, but
Right.
yeah, like I really did genuinely appreciate like your insight into not only banking but just math in general stuff. So thank you so much for coming on.
yeah.
I really
was
appreciated this.
Very charitable when we made math jokes earlier, but for
Yes.
those, I'm sure Lucas would probably say that economics is much more sociology than it is mathematics. When you get into like macroeconomics, you might see some projection trends and stuff, but a lot of it is how do people behave in the face of scarcity,
Right.
and so a lot of economics is much more approachable than people think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fundamentally about decision making and behavior.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And that's it for me.
If we ever have another great movie coming up that we think economics is going to show up, we'd love to have you back.
Yeah. You've been great.
Yeah, just let
Or
me know.
Hercules and Xena.
Yeah, it's true. Any Olympus or Greek mythology movie.
Yeah.
Did you do any studying for that podcast? Like do you see yourself as somewhat of an expert in Greek mythology?
Goodness, no.
Oh, but did you learn a lot?
Neither were
there?
the people that wrote this
Okay.
series.
Yeah, that's fair then. Okay.
Perhaps even less so than I am.
That's fantastic. I recently went through a book series on
Percy Jackson.
Percy Jackson
yes,
series.
yeah, it's a fun series.
It's like I'm not an expert either, but I'm familiar with a lot of the names currently. I'll lose it real quickly.
I've seen maybe one or two full episodes of Hercules or Xena, but there's one moment that I almost always use for a GIF when I get the opportunity, which is him going disappointed. And apparently the story behind that is like
he was disappointed.
No, so they would write in italics if it was supposed to be "this is how you behave," but they forgot to italicize that, so he just yelled it. It's great. It's great. Kevin Sorbo's a treasure.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for us this week. Thanks so much again, Lucas.
Oh yeah.
And we'll catch you guys in 2 weeks with Spirited Away.
Yes, and remember to check out Tuttle Twins.
Yes, in the show notes.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks for listening. We had a great time putting this together for you.
To join the conversation, find us on Facebook and Instagram at Silver Screen Biases.
And on Twitter at Screen Biases.
We believe in value for value, so if you found value in our show, we ask you to consider supporting us.
Links to our social media and support can be found in the show notes.